Okay, it's 5 p.m. Let's call this study session of the Finance Subcommittee of the Board of Education for the Santa Fe Public Schools to order. If we could stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and the salute to the New Mexico flag in English and in Spanish, as well as the acknowledgement of tribal land, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Juro fidelidad a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América y a la república que representa una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos. I salute the flag of the state of New Mexico, the zealous symbol of perfect friendship among united cultures. Saludo la bandera del Estado de Nuevo México, el simbología de amistad perfecta entre culturas unidas. We acknowledge the original people of the land, the Tesuque Pueblo people, and other tribal nations, and ask them to walk with us today as we share and learn together. Thank you very much. Welcome, Christina. It's good to see you. Hi. We are on to approval of the agenda. If I may have a motion or any changes?
Recommend we approve the agenda.
I second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, on to the introduction of the interpreter.
Good evening, Madam President Noble, members of the board, and associate or sitting in for Dr. Garcia, Linda Sink, and administrative staff. My name is Germán Martinez, and I will be providing any translation or interpreter services. If anybody would like those services, please raise your hand, and I'll provide those in the back of the room. Mi nombre es Germán Martínez, y provee cualquier traducción o servicios de traducción. Si alguien ocupa esos servicios, por favor, levante la mano y les ayudaré atrás de la sala. Gracias.
Thank you very much. And on the suggestion, which I forgot to communicate to Vice President Price a week ago, we think you should start that piece in Spanish. Do the English second. Okay, on to public forum. Is anybody signed up? I don't see many public. Okay, moving swiftly along to the finance presentation. Acting Superintendent Sink.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President. We will be presenting for the board study session tonight the finance latest and greatest from our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Germán Martinez, and we'll have other people speaking from the table as well as myself. And we would ask on the next page, you'll see the overview of what we'll be talking about today. And we will also ask if we can hold questions up through page 15, which is the New Mexico Tax and Revenue. And then it starts on quite a different subject after that, so we could start over again there, if that's okay with you.
Is that good with the board? Holding questions through page 15? Okay, thank you. Let's keep going.
Madam President Noble, members of the board, just in terms of the overview, we'll start off discussing briefly the audit status and then go into some of the budgeted enrollment trends and projections, discuss briefly the per pupil expenditures, which is a new requirement, and then go over some of the operational revenues and the estimated impacts. In regards to the audit status, the current field work for the audit is being completed We anticipate that the drafts will be submitted and provided as of the end of October, and to be submitted to the Office of the State Auditor by November 15th, which is well in line with what the order of the audit process is required, and then to be released by the Office of the State Auditor sometime in January or February after they review the financials. We anticipate that we are ahead of schedule in terms of the audit itself, and anticipate that some of the findings that we had from prior years should be cleared up. Obviously, we can't discuss any of the findings until the audit has been released, but we anticipate that the findings that are potential, or at least that some of the areas of focus that the auditors have for this year are personnel contracts and fixed assets, which were items that were also from prior fiscal years. In addition to that, the audit work plan for this June 30th of 2019 fiscal year closure will also include a management discussion and analysis, which was not included in the prior year's audited financial statements. And that's just an overview and a narrative of where the financials sit for the district.
I would like to interject that Dr. Garcia mentioned and wanted me to mention that Chief Financial Officer Germán Martinez and his team is way ahead of the game, and that she's very pleased with the progress.
In going over the budgeted enrollment for the school year for the upcoming fiscal year 2020 and 2021, just to highlight how the budgeted enrollment is estimated based off the 80 and the 120th day average from the prior fiscal year. And so these numbers that you identify for each of the school years are actually prior year enrollment. So we do have those snapshots on the 80 and the 120th day that are submitted, and then that average is taken, and that is the baseline funding for the subsequent fiscal year. On fiscal year 2020-2021, we're estimating 12,149 students, which is a slight decrease from the current fiscal year funding. And we'll discuss a little more in detail why that is.
So we're going to be talking about the trends in enrollment for the next few pages from elementary to mid to high school. And I would appreciate it if Mr. Elias Bernardino come in. He is the the Chief Officer of Data, if he would please come to the front.
Good afternoon. It fell out. I apologize. Good afternoon, Board President Noble, board members. What you have in front of you is trend analysis. As Mr. Germán Martinez mentioned, the calculations for membership funding, it's taking the average of 80th and 120th day. What you have in this table is 40th day reporting. I'll remind you there is 4 reporting periods in the school year, and 40th, 80th, 120th, and then end of year. And you can see this table, it's very detailed of the enrollment, and the gains and loss is the difference from the specific school year variance from the prior year. And I think it's separated by elementary schools, and I'll let you go through those pages. Elementary, K-8 and middle schools is the other category. High schools, and last but not least is the alternative and other programs.
Madam President, I would like to say that Mr. Bernardino was not planning to stay through the whole discussion today. So if you all, especially on specific schools, or have some questions of Mr. Bernardino, we might want to do this part if any of the board have questions.
Board Member Cashman.
Can you tell me when the 40th day was? What's the date?
Board Member Cashman, the 40th day is typically in the beginning of October of every academic calendar year.
Okay, so then I have a follow-on question. Dr. Garcia provided me with Power School enrollment as of the 2nd of October. The 40th day wasn't reached, but now when I look at these numbers, there's quite a bit of difference in some of these numbers. So what happened between the beginning of October and when we reported in Power School we lost more kids again?
Board Member Cashman, typically enrollment is relatively high in the beginning of the school year because we have families who are registered into our school, and then we go through a process of is the student with us for 10, I'm sorry, let me take that back. If a student is absent for 10 or more days consecutively, then we go through a withdrawal process. However, we have a new legislative mandate where we need to know where our student went. So if they went to another district, we have to contact the other district to verify that they are actually in that district. So that takes some time. This is the first year that districts are implementing this, so it's taken a little bit longer to withdraw students from our system. So when you see those decreases in enrollment, it's going through that process.
And I know this isn't fair to ask you because you don't have the chart that Dr. Garcia had given me, but I'll just take Cesar Chavez, the first school. On October 2nd, there were 428 kids reported from Power School. Now there are 391. Those 30 kids I don't find moved to another school because I go through, like Ramirez Thomas had 487th at the second day of October. Now we're down to 454. So it just seems like there's a lot of kids, and I can't believe all those kids left us. So I guess what I would be saying, I'm sure you're taking these numbers from Power School too. Did we have a glitch in Power School in the beginning of October? I mean, these kids just don't disappear. I mean, you know, quickly looking, there's quite a few kids that we accounted for in the beginning of October that aren't here for our 40th day. And I know our private schools did not get a huge increase. And I know just we don't have all these kids out on the street wandering around. So I'm wondering, was there a problem with Power School in the beginning?
There was not a glitch in Power School. It comes down to there's a lot of withdrawal forms, and there is a process to reach families and identify where the student is. And unfortunately, we don't make contact on the first phone call or email, and so they have to call us back, and then we have to call them back. This process involves 2 different departments, so trying to align, and it was the beginning of a new initiative, and with any program in the beginning, it takes some time to solidify the structure on how we want to process those withdrawals.
Mr. Bernardino, can I add to that?
Mm-hmm.
Just as an ex-principal, and of course it was more like 100 to 200 students that were no-shows. So like he's saying, is they never came. Many of these, so there's some of these that came for a little while and then left and are been gone for 10 days. But most of these are students that never came. But they don't show to you on any place for you to see that they didn't show, because we haven't deleted them yet, because we can't by law just put them down as a no-show yet until we find where they are.
So then let me just follow on so I make sure I understand it. So they initially showed up in Power School. And so the Power School, and I don't want you to tell me yes, because then I have a problem with it, but the Power School counts that we take right in the beginning of the year, I thought we were supposed to be putting attendance in, and those are accurate numbers, but you know, I mean, I can give you my figures and I can give you the chart that Dr. Garcia gave me, but it just seems like, you know, I mean, enrollment is super important for many different reasons, not just for our funding, but it, you know, and so if the Power School counts are not accurate right in the beginning, and one of our kids, you know, it wouldn't happen, but, you know, there's a crime committed. Power School and teachers take attendance, we've got to be able to reconcile those efforts, saying, yes, that kid was physically here, so he couldn't have been vandalizing that area. We have accounted for him. So I'm concerned with the numbers that, you know, I had, you know, because the 2nd of October is not that far, and then to see, you know, 20 kids here, 30 kids here, that's concerning to me.
And
You
Mr.
know.
Bernardino, you may explain the difference, because we do, through our meetings and going through which students are still no-shows after the 10 days, they're just not automatically dropped, but we're also funding schools based on the true amount. So I think you'd need to explain how you know that versus what's showing on Power School if they haven't been dropped yet.
So there is the first 10 days of the school year, teachers are taking attendance, and are also, administration is taking a count. And correct. And what we go through that process, sometimes enrollment is higher because they did register with us, or there was not a withdrawal process with us. So I believe we were over 13,000 in the beginning of the school year, and then we started to see a decrease because we were going through the process of withdrawing students. I think where you saw from October 2nd to October 15th, there was another drop, is because there was a bottleneck when it came to this new mandate about verifying we're a student, and we were still solidifying our process and become more efficient because there was a bottleneck. Schools were submitting withdrawal forms, and we weren't processing them quick enough because it did involve 2 departments, and it does involve documenting that the district made every effort to contact the family and the other school where they were going, whether it's private or another district, even if in another state. I know that we've made various calls to Colorado to make sure that the student is really in Colorado. So once we get that confirmation, then we document, and at that time, we go through the process of withdrawing. We changed that process. Now what we're doing is, I know it's a little bit more information, is we're tagging those students that we need to do a follow-up, so that way the enrollment numbers really reflect closer to our membership of who is in the classroom. So during that period of time, we were still trying to come up with a good process on how to account for the students and know that we have what's called safety net program, and we meeting those requirements as well. And that's what we were going through in the month of October.
So just as a follow-up, because this, you know, I mean, one of the things that I felt as a teacher, even as a sub, my most important thing to do every day is get those counts right. Who is in my class? Because if something happens, we are liable if we said that kid was in our class and they weren't there, or vice versa. So if it's just paperwork, you know, we're trying to get our paperwork all caught up or whatever, we need to clearly make sure that it's documented throughout the district, because I remember as a teacher, I would have school sites that would give, you know, a year later ask, was this child we had to justify where this kid was a year later. So if it's not documented, or we said we were switching systems, I'm just looking for the liability of the district. And, we saw what happened to one of our students that we thought we had. So we need to just please make sure we're keeping, because, in case you decided to go work someplace else, which we don't want you to, but in case you did, we've got to have that documentation so somebody can go back in and look at those records and say, this is what happened, because I'm just concerned that the numbers I'm seeing seem a little bit out of whack, okay?
Thank you, Board.
Board Member Carrillo.
First off, what's kind of interesting here when we look at the numbers in all these schools, they're hardly busting at the seams as the public often thinks they are. Not even close to where they were in 2014-15, as I remember. And so what I'd like to know, and then I'm curious first about Pignon and Amy Beal. So we know that we very intentionally started moving kids out of Amy Beal because, well, they were lying to get in, not the kids, their parents. And we wanted to I hate that word, right size. We wanted the school's enrollment to reflect actually kids that living in the district. And so we can see why that went down. But given how Pignons went up so much, why do we send them all to Pignon? If we had a choice as to where to send them, or is that where they were zoned? Or it just seems like Pignon had an inordinate increase, and
I could maybe shed some light on that. As we, for Amy Beal, the overflow school was at Pignon. So the kids from Amy Beal that couldn't fit in but were zoned for Amy Beal, we had buses that transported them over to Pignon. Then as the principal made sure that everybody that was there was either in the zone or had a valid interzone transfer.
at Amy Beal.
At Amy Beal. There were already kids over at Pignon, and I think the district made a decision at that time, rather than to be disruptive to those parents that had said, okay, I'll move my kid, and for a lot of them, they moved multiple kids in a family, that they could stay at Pignon instead of coming back to Amy Beal. So I think that's maybe, I can't say that's total all, but that was a conversation that went on, is to be, not making these families be inconvenienced multiple times.
Okay, so I appreciate the effort, but it didn't answer my question. So it's like, why were they all sent to Pignon, or most of them, if they weren't even zoned for Pignon? Why weren't they basically sent back to their home district? Because it seems like we inordinately let kids go to Pignon that maybe shouldn't have even gone to Pignon. Well, I want to hear from one of them.
Ms. Wagner, do you want to come up?
Pignon gains 38 kids. So are all those 38 zoned for Pignon? And the year before, the 20, are all of those zoned for Pignon that we moved out of Amy Beal?
Board Member Creo, without that specific enrollment data in front of us, the transfer data, we can't answer those particulars this evening. What we can confirm is that the board did vote to make Pignon an overflow boundary for Amy Beal, and we worked really hard to control the enrollment at Amy Beal. We can also confirm that Pignon's capacity is a little larger than Amy Beal. My sense, and Mr. Bernardino would have to pull the data, that there are still quite a few transfers at Pignon. It's a popular school. But we have not over-enrolled it per se, or put an undue strain on the school. Ms. Devotie is very consistent about advocating for her enrollment and her staffing and what's best for kids.
Great, thank you. So then let's go down to the middles. And I'm sure somebody has this on their computer tonight, because this isn't a tough one. on all of these schools, what portion is K6, except for Ortiz? What portion is K6 and what portion is 7-8? And I would imagine that's at someone's fingertips. If they can't do it like this minute, they can do it by certainly the next 15 minutes. Next 15 minutes? That's fine.
Ms. Bernardino, will you be able to do that for us? Okay,
Thank you.
we'll get that to you.
And then also on page 9. So we've seen a steady decline in the enrollment at Engage, which is unfortunate. And what I would probably guess is because we're not putting the recruiting efforts in that we used to do when we created the school. Is that the case? And if so, why? And if it's not the case, then why has the enrollment dropped so much when that program is so necessary? I mean, it doesn't cost us much because we get money for those kids.
Mr. Chavez, did you want to respond to that?
Sure. Board Member Carrillo, that's something definitely I'll investigate with Dr. Sanchez and see what she has to say, and investigate to see if we are promoting it or not, just as you're speaking, why the enrollment's decreased, and what are we doing to address it. So at this point, I couldn't answer why it dropped or not. I would research it with Dr. Sanchez.
Okay, so I know you're new in the role that you're in for this year, but I would imagine there's somebody here that was here for the last years that could speak to it, other than Dr. Sanchez, because it seems like little to no effort has been made to enroll kids in this school when it has proven success. Kids with diplomas that would have never had diplomas. They'd be statistics if it weren't for this school. And we allowed them the opportunity for high school diplomas. So if we can't get that information tonight, I'd like the superintendent, if she would, to report on it on the 6th. I think it's reasonable. Yeah?
And to be clear, why declining enrollment at Engage?
Why declining enrollment? What specific efforts are we doing? What is our organizing plan around recruiting for Engage?
Okay. On this point, Board Member Cashman? Yeah.
I can't recall, but maybe Mr. Martinez can tell us. I thought that the state took away funding for any child over 21, that they were no longer going to fund us for students that, except for you could continue that year, but you couldn't go beyond that. And I thought that happened in the last legislature, but I could be wrong.
Okay. Secretary Garcia.
Very good questions. Obviously, as we know why we're here. And first of all, I'd just like to apologize to the board as into why my absence was the last board meeting, but actually it all makes sense now as into why we're moving forward with this. Very interesting numbers that we have here. As Board Member Price said, we have 3 different numbers, 3 different figures that have been coming out from the office. One of the questions I have is, how does the staff go about relating to projections? How do we project in the next 2 or 3 years how many kids are actually going to be in the district? Because one of the questions I have is, my district, actually, the most is Sweeney Elementary, called Sunset when I went there, is 23 kids are additional in the next 2021 projections. How does staff go about projecting that there's going to be 23 more kids in that district? Is that based off of housing? Is that based off of the stuff, all the developments going on in that area? And why only 23 more kids, not 50, not 55?
Secretary Garcia, my office, we go through 2 different periods when it comes to projections. One, I would say, is what you have in front of you, I believe, is a system of taking the last 5 years and doing an analysis, a trend analysis by grade level, by school. And then we take the change and then apply it to the current enrollment. So, for example, if a school has 10 kids in a class, 20 kids in a classroom, and I'll make it a little bit easier, 100 kids in one grade, and the change is -2%, an average of the last 5 years. We apply that and for the following year. We also apply another factor, which is the transfer in and transfer out index. So if we've seen in the last 5 years that their index of transferred in or transfer out has increased, we also apply that number. And then we round up, not round down. And that's how we do those specific projections. For kindergarten, this year, we are going to apply a new index to our projections, which it's my understanding we haven't done in the past.
So really quick, Madam President, I'm just going to say this one time, and we put it for the record, as the paper has said, that I may or may not represent my district. I know my district better than anybody knows my district. And I grew up in that district. I still live in that district. And so the question I'm asking is, whenever you actually have development that's happening in the south side there, do we actually look at the housing index as into how many new houses are getting built? Who's going to live in those housings? What's happening in Tierra Contenta phase 3, 4, or 5? What's happening in Los Solares? Do we even look at that? Do we care about that? Because one thing again for the record is I know my district. So I just want to put that on the record. So I'm just wondering, how do we actually go for projections in my district here? Look at the detention center. We're actually assuming that we're going to have 3 more losses in the detention center. How do we actually determine that a young individual is actually going to have, or we're going to have less crime in the next 2 or 3 years? Where did we come up with 3 less at the detention center?
So if I may, what I heard was, and funnily enough, I've been reading a lot about regression analysis, which is ultimately plotting the trend on a line graph. And I think that when we have done more sophisticated analysis, we do look at housing starts and that sort of thing, if I'm not mistaken. But I don't believe that the district on a year-on-year basis has the capacity to analyze the housing. We could do that on an ongoing basis, but it sounds like, if I heard you correctly, that we chart the trends and estimate based on the percentages there.
Board Member Noble, Board Member President Noble, that is correct. One thing that we are adding to our analysis this year is birth counts. So in the last 7 years, I can tell you that we've averaged 80%, our kindergartners are about 80% of the birth counts in our county. So I can somewhat predict what our kindergartners are going to look like next year and the year after that. Secretary Garcia, you're right, we don't take into account any new development. We've also looked at the population, but some of that data is outdated, is not current. So it's very difficult for us to really bring those factors in. What we're doing is trying to analyze the current environment and taking into account the birth counts. And we've run some models to see how accurate we come. Some seem about 95% confidence level to be able to be at that prediction. But there's so many different factors. For example, this year we had 15 families that came from another country that we had to support and help. We didn't have that in our predictions. So that is something that is very difficult for us to predict in that regard, but I can tell you there's 15 families in one school we had to serve. Anyhow, so there's a lot of factors we could take into account, but as President Noble mentioned, we don't have the capacity or the tool to go in that much depth.
Thank you. So, Madam President, what's interesting about that is we all talk about the census and we talk about the individual that need to be counted. And so in my district, as we all know, is actually, there's individuals in my district that actually don't want to be counted because they're afraid to be counted. And so how does the district actually count families that don't want to stand up and say, here, count me as a census, because that's what everything's happening next year too, is it's about the census. And once again, in my district, people don't want to be counted because they're afraid. And so how does the school district project, you said 80%, higher birth rates. Whenever we did a study about 2 or 3 years ago, the individual that we hired said that the growth in the south side area is only 1 to 2% in the next 2 or 3 years. And now we're talking about 80% more birth rate. So how do we work all this together as into 80% birth rate in the next years? Or maybe did I understand wrong?
Yeah, let me clarify. So if there are, I don't have it in front of me to know exactly the count of births that we had this year or last year. So if 1,000 births in Santa Fe County, we serve 800 of them. That has been the trend for the last 7 years. It's actually been declining just a tad bit, 100 basis points from year to year. But we average out about 80% of birth counts in Santa Fe County. So if there were 1,000 births in 2020, we should expect, if the trends is about the same in 2025, 800 of those students will be served by our kindergarten teachers.
So, Madam President, how do we go about tracking births?
That
The county census data, the hospital?
It's
We
the
have 3-4
health
different answers to me.
department who tracks all of that data for us. And the most recent data is as of 2017. I do have that data, I don't have it here in front of you.
That's fine, and not to put staff on the spot. However, you also mentioned earlier that we have 2 departments that are doing 2 different analysis. So in your professional analysis, what do you recommend? Should we have just one department that's looking at that stuff, or should we have both departments that are doing it right now?
Secretary Garcia, I don't think, I think there's a misunderstanding. When I was speaking to two departments involved through the withdrawal process. One is the Truancy Task Force, who is in charge of contacting families to ensure that our students who exited or separated our district are in those other areas. As they indicated, my team is who focuses only on data and data analysis.
So what can the board or the state legislature help you out or help out the school district as in to see what these students withdraw from a district and how we track them? How can we figure that out? What can help out the individual student?
Secretary Garcia, we just had to come up with a good structure internally. It was just more managerial procedures that we needed to define because it was a new initiative for statewide in terms of requirements and what we need to report. And my office and this truancy office, we just unfortunately did not meet in a timely manner in the beginning until all of these procedures came to fruition. I feel confident that we won't have this issue the next reporting period or even next school year.
Thank you.
3,700 average births in Santa Fe County for the past 3 years, each year. 3,700. Average per year for the past 3 years, 3,694. Anyway, Board Member Cashman.
A couple of things on birth rates and developments. Are you getting the information, the Citizen Review Committee, in order for us to do facility master planning? Demographer is hired, ARC, correct? And so they provide us with what they think the trend is, the demographic trend for, I think it's 10 years out and past. So we're looking at that. We also get information on where the developments are, and we would see probably less people if Las Campanas was developing a lot compared to Tierra and Contenta. So we're tracking all of that. So is that feeding into, are you getting that information too to help you? Because we get it and we've been getting it for many, many years.
Board Member Cashman, my team and I haven't really brought that information in. As Board Member President Noble mentioned earlier, we're just creating a structure for us to develop a good statistical model when it comes to projections and what factors do we need to bring in to be able to have more accurate numbers.
And just for your information, if you're not looking at that ARC data, but we are showing in that data too, this declining enrollment. And, you know, so especially for, you know, that, you know, in order for us to increase our enrollment at high school, we got to have a lot of kindergarten kids maintaining those enrollments, and ARC is showing that the trend for Santa Fe County is declining. So we're going to see it in our school system. So you might want to talk with the facilities and just get the charts that they're constantly showing to us, because, you know, it's been declining for many, many years. And they're pretty, because we always argue with them about, is that data right? And when you see what they provided us from now until maybe 10 years ago, they're spot on, you know, which is scary because whatever they do, and, you know, they show a declining trend for the district.
Madam President, just really quick on that note, is I used to always bring this up, declining in the Santa Fe Public School District. Yes, it's happening. I'm just surprised to see some of these numbers because, yeah, Cesar Chavez actually, we're losing 9 kids. We have Sunset, I call it Sunset Elementary, but Sweeney Elementary, actually we're gaining 23 kids. We have a decline in Capitol High School, as into 24 kids lost, which is, I understand the 24 kids, I understand the 9 kids. It's just not alarming to me, but it's just interesting to see that. I just actually assumed that a lot of in my district, that we were busting at the seams, as Board Member Carrillo mentioned, and I guess we're not. We're not busting at the seams at Capitol High School. We're not busting at the seams at Sweeney Elementary. We're not busting at the seams at Cesar Chavez, Ramirez Thomas. We're good.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Board Member Carrillo.
Guess that kind of shoots the nail in that one argument, doesn't it? Looking at ECO, I'd be curious about the same thing. If we're earmarking in CRC $10 million for a build-out of facilities at ECO, and we see a declining enrollment every year of quite a bit, I would say, except the one year it was 1, but we're down to 112 next year from 143, and I think it was around 155 at its high, something like that when it opened. What the heck? What are we going to do? What are we doing to let the public know what we're going to be doing at ECO in terms of facility and opportunity for all of these trades? Because we were all, I mean, I know Rudy and Kate were not on the board then, but this was a legacy piece, right, Ms. Price? This was something we were doing that was so groundbreaking for northern New Mexico. And I don't hear anything or see anything going on in the community around, hey, here's this great 21st century trades and technology school. We have set aside $10 million in the 2017 bond. People are wondering what the heck, and I'd be wondering what the heck. And then and I imagine there's going to have to be a carryover into the 2021 bond. So, I mean, obviously if we don't know what's going on, then the community doesn't know what's going on. And I would say that is of near grave concern.
Question is, what the heck?
Question is, and we want some answers. Like, what are we going to do to make sure that if we build it, they will come?
Ms. Wagner, did you want to speak to that?
Board Member Carrillo, we are working with the ECO community on recruitment efforts. We had a huge summer camp program to attract middle schoolers to the campus and run hands-on learning and get people in the community engaged in and aware of the options there. We have to control enrollment now because we have a limited campus. We're working out of portables and small-size classrooms. We're working with limited staff counts. And so this is something that is sort of on a parallel track. The school is scheduled for demolition and the first phase of renovation over the next year and a half. I expect there'll be an uptick in enrollment. We do a lot of outreach efforts, though, to our middle schools, to our K-8s, via this summer program vehicle I was speaking of. As a matter of fact, ECO is representing the district this Friday at our extended learning sort of symposium that the state is hosting in Albuquerque. They were so impressed by the work that they saw when they visited ECO. So I think ECO is definitely going to continue to grow. These enrollment projections might need to be tightened up a little bit once we start looking at the facility improvements. Right now, I think it's a really controlled environment because of limited facilities.
I understand. Thank you. That helps a lot. And then also, yes, you may.
I have a comment on ECO as well.
So what I would suggest is less than a year ago, I think ECO came and the facilities people came and gave a board a presentation. But if we've forgotten about it, maybe it would be good not to restart a whole new presentation, but just regenerate that again and come to a board and just give us a little snapshot again, because there are, you know, as far as facilities, there's a lot of moving parts, but they have been keeping us informed.
Secretary Garcia.
Just really quick on that. I may have missed a meeting or two, obviously. However, the last I heard about ECO was actually we were going to have a presentation on the master plan because we were hiring an architectural firm to do a master plan, and I have not seen that, the master plan yet. And with all due respect, Mrs. Wagner, you're actually telling us now they're going to start demolishing the property, the buildings, and you're expecting that enrollment's going to be higher. Where does all this stuff come from?
Board Secretary Garcia, the master plan and the phasing has been presented conceptually to the Citizens Review Committee, and we're in the process of procuring an architect through RFP. And architects come and present to the board once they're at the phase development, at about design development of the project. So the project is projected out over the next 18 months, that architect coming on board in the next probably 2 months. I wouldn't imagine the board will see a presentation about that project until about springtime. Design development will be available and ready. We're demolishing an abandoned building on campus. It's an old building, the old VOTEC building that hasn't been occupied for years, and rebuilding. And so as that conceptual plan comes to fruition and gets to design development, we'll bring it to the board for approval.
So, Madam President, so we have $10 million, as Board Member Carrillo said. And so now we're going to take down this building, we're going to take down this building. So as a board member, I would actually like to see what the overall plan is for that entire site, that entire property. Not, we're going to take down this portion of this building because that's the old VOTEC. We're going to take down this building. We're going to do design build on this building. What are we getting for our $10 million? That's what I want to know. And how is it going to be, and what is the time frame for that, and when is it going to work, and how, and is it design build? How are we doing all that? Because I don't like, my personal opinion is I don't want piecemeal for the taxpayers $10 million. Give us this grand plan, what it's going to work and how it's going to work, and the time frame for all this stuff. Because honestly, I think that, I understand that the Citizens Review Committee is actually working on this plan, but I think the board should be informed as we actually move along with the property there on the ECO property.
Board Member Carrillo.
So Milagro, we see take a huge dive. And I imagine, because I know that we were projecting at one point like 620, 630 in that school when we had the new campus, and we have 513. And I would imagine there was a lot of unease from the parents. You know, people had no idea what to expect, and they're, you know, sending kids someplace else. But one would think that I could see that happening in 2017, 18, and 18, 19. But one would think that in 1920, with this incredible facility, we would have had an uptick, yet we lost a bunch of kids. And so I would like, again, you know, and I think I said this in the last school board meeting, schools have to learn to compete as businesses do, right? We are fighting for the same kids that are in charters and that are in privates, Catholics, and now people doing all their online rigmarole. That's how I feel about online rigmarole. But anyway, so if there could be some sort of plan that comes to us probably after January 1st, because the makeup of the board could likely be different, what are we going to do to really get the elementary kids coming to Milagro? Because that is an amazing facility, and I know they have a really wonderful staff as well. So, recruiting kids.
Okay. We ready to go to page 10? Hold questions for 5 more pages after this, and we can, at some point, release Mr. Bernardino.
I think the last page, unless someone does have questions on this one, self-evident, I think. So I think we've generally been talking about it. So do you feel like we can move forward? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bernardino. You can go ahead and continue.
Thank you. Madam President Noble, members of the board, in continuation, so this next slide is a discussion regarding the New Mexico Public Education Department's new requirement for reporting of expenditures by pupil, or in essence, a site-based per pupil expenditures. This was required as of the public education's submission for the Every Student Succeeds Act, and it was developed through the Georgetown University. This is more of a simplified approach model, which essentially just is an overall expenditures divided by the number of students for each of those sites. We're currently working on what this model really looks like and the data that is being compiled for this report. And it has not been submitted to the Public Education Department yet, so that's still internal. But it is a new requirement, and it may be public information as the Public Education Department releases that. It will also be issued on the dashboards for each of the sites as well. And so this is just kind of providing some information as far as that new reporting requirement and what that will show as far as when those student enrollments decrease, as they decrease, that those per pupil expenditures may increase, or there may be other shifts or changes as far as which expenditures are higher than others. The format for this was to be divided within the state and local funds as opposed to the federal and the state funds and how those were allocated to each of the sites. So this is a new reporting requirement through the Public Education Department that we will be submitting. The next slide, this is more of just consolidating some of that trend analysis in terms of how that would impact the budget revenue for fiscal year 2020, 2021. So as we were discussing, the budgeted enrollment is based off the 80 and the 120th day average, and then the 40th day becomes the certification date in which if there is any increases in enrollment, those are established or certified on the 40th day, or if there are any decreases in enrollment, significant decreases, then on the 40th day, those are validated as well. Just in terms of the trend between the 40th, 80th, and the 120th day, there is on average a 1 to 2% decrease in enrollment. And so what we're projecting is a decrease of 185 students from the 40th day, which is the current, to the next 2 reporting periods being the 80 and the 120th day average. This would estimate to be about a $1.8 million in a decrease as far as the funding. Again, these are assumptions that we don't know until those reporting dates are issued. And then also there may be other factors as far as just membership, which I will go a little more in depth as far as how that membership is translated into units and funding for the school district. So the next slide, please. The other impacts, potential operational impacts for fiscal year 2020 and 2021, as we saw the small school size adjustment being implemented in the current fiscal year 1920. This is a 5-year phase-in, and so in fiscal year 1920, we had a decrease of about 442,000, which we will estimate will be another decrease in the subsequent fiscal year. We also have a 4-year phase-in for the T&E, that's the Training and Experience Index, and the TCI, which is a Teacher Cost Index. That's a 4-year phase-in, which essentially changes the reporting for, or the ability to capture some of those additional units. So that would be a decrease of 100,000. There's also the ERB contributions, which we will be required to issue for substitutes starting July of 2020, which will be an additional 100,000. In fiscal year 1920, we did not receive a separate allocation directly for instructional materials, so that was needed to be funded out of the operational budget, and so that was, we're estimating approximately $1 million. And then lastly, we have not received the funding from the state as far as the transportation or student nutrition services for the extended learning, which we were indicated would be received as of the end of either September or beginning of October. So we haven't received that, and we estimate that will be an additional 50,000 if we also participate in that extended learning as well. This is obviously some general assumptions. There are some funding impacts that may be on the revenue side as far as what the state is going to be appropriating or allocating to school districts, which I will discuss in another slide, in a subsequent slide. But this is, in general, some of the overall impacts that we're anticipating for fiscal year 2020-2021. The next slide identifies how the membership or the enrollment translates into the funding units. As you can see, each of those membership, if they are either in a specific grade level or in a specific program, those are weighted, and we generate additional units for each of those programs. One of the major shifts from fiscal year 2018-2019 to 2019-2020 was that T&E TCI multiplier. So there was a shift in terms of where that multiplier was located in the funding formula, and that is how we are being impacted as far as that decrease in those units. So this essentially shows that we are, although we may not necessarily be decreasing the number of units, we are actually decreasing the multiplier for those individual units. And so as that shifts, we will continually decrease in the number of units that are generated. And then those units are then multiplied by the unit value itself. The next slide is showing what the New Mexico Tax and Rev financial forecast is showing. This is based off of estimates from multiple groups. This was through the Legislative Finance Committee's reports that they generate through the Consensus Revenue Estimating Group and other economists, and so what it will show is that in 2019, we did generate an increase of $1.1 billion in the state's total revenue. The ending balance, or the additional revenue, was estimated at 1.71 billion, or a 27% increase. In 2020, it's estimated that we'll have a slower revenues, slightly lower at the total of 7.78 billion, and then estimated 2.281 billion, or 32%. In this new fiscal year of 2020-2021, the estimate is about 907 million, or 14%. Essentially, the estimated forecast is identifying that we are slowing down in terms of what the oil and gas revenues at the state level, what they have been generating. And so, although we did realize a significant impact in fiscal year 1920 as far as new revenues, it is at a slower pace that is being estimated for subsequent fiscal years. This is based off of what the economists are showing in terms of what the state can generate in revenues, based off of either oil production or the sale and revenues. The productions are estimated to decrease in the next year or two, which essentially means that these new money may not continue to be in fruition over the next 2 to 3 years. It will slightly slow down. This new money for fiscal year 2020-2021 of $907 million is, again, for the entire state's budget, of which the state is looking at a 20% reserve of those funds, which essentially means we would not realize that full $907 million in the state's budget.
So at this stage, we pause for questions on those previous pages. Correct?
Correct.
Board Member Carrillo, and then we'll come down the line.
Okay, on page 13. Oh, no, it's okay, because you kind of answered that instructional material stuff. But I guess all of this relates to, okay, so page 15. Concerned, first, sub-bullet, if you will, recurring revenues estimated at 7.92 billion. I'm always concerned about the word recurring when it's tied to oil and gas. The legislature doesn't seem very concerned about it. But why did you use the word recurring when we can't count on it?
And just really quick on that note, Mr. Board Member, Madam President, is a very good question. And so I wrote actually a note here that we have no control of how the state legislature actually does all that money and who they give to and what it is. But he has a very good point of recurring. Actually, oil and gas money is actually for bricks and mortar projects, which actually that money is used for capital projects to build stuff, build bridges, build schools, so on and so forth. And so you may not be able to answer it. I understand that. But it's just the 1.7 or the 1.7 billion in added revenue to the state budget is actually, like I said, that's for bricks and mortar. If you look at the state legislative capital outlay, oil and gas revenue that comes from the Permian Basin, that's actually based off of, it's just for capital outlay projects. That's what it's for. And so,
Well, not all of it, because we're talking about our overall budget. But I'm just curious as to, I mean, I don't think it's recurring. I don't think it's, steadfast that we can absolutely count on it. So I'm curious as to why y'all think we can.
The state books that oil and gas revenue is recurring. They just do.
Okay, so then the next thing I would say is, this underscores again, whether I'm, I know why I put that there on page 13. It underscores again the need, whether I'm not on the board, but for the board to continue pushing for a holds education harmless law, so that when there are dips, that they don't go after our budget as the biggest percentage of the overall budget. I mean, that's so important, and other states do that to protect education, and we just, fly by the seat of our pants. So on page 13, I would ask that that in this coming legislative session, since it's a money session, that, Dr. Garcia emphasized to our, lobbyists and others to take because if I'm understanding this right, we're going to take a $1 million hit, again, of instructional material. Something seems inherently wrong with that, given their incredible moonshot of supporting public ed. So I would just ask that we have that on our agenda this upcoming session to please not have our district or any others take a hit in instructional materials. And that might also be something we want to take to the NMSBA if all that resolution stuff hasn't been done yet. Note to self. Okay, thank you.
Board Member Cashman.
Back on page 11. On this new simplified approach that we're going to have to, that PED is requiring us to present data, are they giving us the format, or are they expecting every district to develop it? Are they going to give us, a cookie cutter that we all plug in, or are they saying, this is what you want, but you districts figure it out?
Board Member Cashman, the Public Education Department is requiring that we follow their formats.
Okay.
If I may, are they requiring it for school year 1920 to begin with, or is it 2021?
This is actually for fiscal year 18-19.
Then, thank you. Then on page,
1919 or 1920?
18-19. So in the prior year, yes.
Sorry.
okay. Then on page 13, do we, and so I either don't understand the small school size adjustment. I thought that we lost $442,000 for this school year, and that it was going to continue to increase by 20%. So we lost 20% this school year. Next school year, we'll see that go up because we're going to have to give back 40% until we get up to where it is 100% we have to give back. So I'm anticipating that should be higher. Am I not understanding the decrease in the small school size adjustment?
Board Member Cashman, you are correct. This is just new additional that we are now having to decrease. So in addition to the 20% or the 442 from last year, this will be an additional decrease.
Well, let me, so I make sure. So are you saying we're going to have 442 that we had to give back this year, plus another 442, so that's like 800, yeah. Is that?
That's correct. That's
okay,
correct.
that's what I thought. That's a big, adjustment. But okay, because I want to ask some more questions.
Exactly this point. Okay, so if we already took out 442 for this year, are you saying that we're taking out 800 and, because it doesn't make sense to me, 884 next year?
Right, correct.
So then the
Compared
following
to 2
year
years,
is
yes.
going to be 1.2 something million.
Correct.
Okay.
Less than
Oh.
the original.
Okay.
Less than the fiscal year 2017-2018.
Okay.
Correct.
So,
Yep.
what's the total?
So,
1 point.
well, by the time we get done, how much will we have lost over in 5 years? So-
Approximately 2 million.
2 million, okay,
Correct.
so, all right, so I have understood it correctly.
No, but
I-
that's not the right math. Because if
Well,
you're
I don't
saying it's
know.
approximately 2 million over 5 years, that's 442,000 something a year, where it's not compounding, where it's not doubling every year, because that's what I'm kind of hearing you guys say, that we'll go from 442 to 884 to 1.2 to,
To the baseline,
To baseline,
not
Right.
to the previous year each time.
yeah.
But to when we had a full small school size adjustment.
442, and then 880.
would be the total of what we have, but it's really only a new 442 each
Right.
year.
Yes.
Got it.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so wait a minute, I want to clarify because I'm not sure I've got it then right. So this fiscal year, we lost 442. Next year, they're going to ask for 40% of that back instead of the 20%. They're going to ask 40%. Am I correct? And so if this is only 20% of what we had to return to them this year, this coming fiscal year, we're going to have to give them back, instead of 20%, we're going to have to give them back 40%. So what will that 40% be dollar-wise? Because if this is sort of the starting point, it's going to keep on increasing, is how I understand it. So I'm just a little bit confused. I like Board Member Carrillo's interpretation better than my interpretation, but I'm not sure. So explain, please, if you can.
Sure, Board Member Cashman. So the 442 is every year. It is not cumulative from the prior year in the sense that we will not be, in addition to the 442, having an additional 442 in the fiscal year 2020, 2021. But however, over the span of the 5 years, there will be an estimated $2 million that we will potentially realize as a decrease.
So then every year, we're losing 442. And so for the next 5 years, and then we're back to sort of no more take from us.
Correct.
Okay. So can I
Because
ask-
we budget on the previous year, so this is from the previous year, which was already 442 reduced. So from the baseline, when we had the full small school adjustment, this will be 884 down. But that's over the course of 2 years, so each year it's just 442 over the previous year. The percentage is always 20%, but we will have given up, we will have given up 40% from the baseline after this one. So it's adding percentages and total monies to get us to 100%, i.e. 2 million.
Correct.
Oh, I have gray hairs already. Sorry.
So I want to ask another thing on small size adjustment. This was phased out statewide, correct? And so what are they doing? How are they, the small schools that really like Jal and, all of these really tiny little places, did they get more money or did they phase it out for everybody? And so how are they supplement? Because I don't know how you run a school district if your whole entire school district is 500 kids from K through high school.
And just also really quick on that note, Madam President, is what is a small school size adjustment? Does anybody know House Bill 5, what it's about?
Is it under 300?
So, Board Member Cashman, Board Secretary Garcia, the actual school size adjustment for elementaries is 200 students, and then for middle and high schools is 400 students. And anything below that would then qualify for the small school size adjustment.
So I apologize, Madam President, Board Member Cashman. So our small schools are actually hurting us in the long run then, the ones that we have less than 200 students.
It's a value question.
I was going to say on Board Member Cashman's question, which is a very valid one, it's metro areas only. It's not JAL.
So the true rural areas is still getting a small size adjustment. It's just like us, Albuquerque, Las Cruces. Okay, that's what I think is fair, but, okay.
You think that's fair? That we take the hit and they don't?
We disagree on philosophy on this. I don't think a school district the size of us should ever receive small school adjustments. And I've felt that way throughout being in New Mexico. It's really for rural areas. So I have always felt that way. I know many people don't agree with me because it's money, but I think, yes, we disagree on a principle in that.
Okay, Secretary Garcia, did you have questions on these pages?
Oh, wait a minute, I'm not done.
Oh, keep going then.
no, I guess I am done, thank you. Oh, no, I'm not. On page 15. The last bullet, it looks like something is missing from the slide. New money for fiscal year '21 is 907 million, or 14%, contingent on what? Are we missing a word here or something?
Board Member Cashman, I believe that should have just been contingent on either tax revenues or what we would receive from gross receipts tax, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Is this changed?
The first one was not correct.
Oh.
If you might see that the total of kinder through 6 on the first one was larger than the entire district, so just disregard that. It was 17,000 and something, so that is, So, and to be clear, this is what Mr. Bernardino generated in response to Board Member Carrillo's question.
Thanks. And if you're going, go Demons. Is that where you're headed to from here? Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm done now. I'm done.
Okay, Secretary Garcia, did you have questions on these pages? No. Vice President Price.
Could you explain to me why the T&E and the TCI multiplier was moved?
Yep, Vice President Price. So the T&E and the TCI multiplier was shifted as a result of, and I don't recall the specific House bill, but in 2019 legislative session, 2018 legislative session, that was one of the requirements that that multiplier move from the end of those additional units, total program units, to above where the special education. And I can provide you with what that House bill was in a later time.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't want to generate more work for you.
And I just had one question on the per pupil expenditures to PED. You said that's going to be on state and local monies only, so excluding federal and grant monies? Did I hear that correctly?
Madam President, the per pupil expenditures calculation will be both on state and local and federal, but they are requiring us to separate those. And so it would disaggregate that specifically for what is considered state and local, how much is expended for those based off of that, and then how much is expended based off of federal. Yeah.
Thank you. Board Member Cashman, yeah?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I did miss a question on page 13. On ERB contributions, I know Albuquerque is going with Kelly Services for their subs. And I know there's a question on whether that's really legal or not, but have we figured that? I mean, I don't know that we want to do that as a district, but if we're getting, if it's advantageous to a sub, they're paying more money to them. Subs are not going to be entitled to those contributions. So have we done a bit of research or seen what type of pushback Albuquerque is getting? I think there is some question on the legality of it, whether it's legal or not.
Board Member Cashman, what we've been told through the ERB office is that they will not qualify any third-party vendors as being excluded from this provision or this requirement. However, we're not sure how the ERB is then going to require for them to report how many substitutes they are issuing or they have currently either are paying out. We do know that the ERB is requiring it through either a quarterly basis or through a monthly basis, so either 15 days out of the month, 5 days out of the month or 15 days out of the quarter, they would qualify as a substitute that would then need to pay into the ERB. We also know that CNM was required to follow this provision under, in the current fiscal year, and know that they are trying to work through some of those nuances as far as how they're reporting and how they're paying into that ERB. And so we have reached out to them and tried to identify what their approach is. We don't know yet what the full scale will be as far as any other implications for the district. We have reached out to third parties as far as some potential contracting to that, but know that also there is 12 to 16% of an additional cost for the district for those types of services. So essentially, if we're paying for either the additional costs for those services or paying the ERB, it's going to be within a relative range, because the ERB contribution rate will be about 12% for the district.
And then just to follow on to that question, and you may not have the answer, or maybe you haven't thought about it, then are we going to increase what we're paying the substitute teachers? Because I think we may get into a point, if all of this contributions are taken out and they're not entitled to it, we're not going to even meet the living wage here in Santa Fe for our subs. And that's going to be a huge problem.
Well, Board Member Cashman, to that point, and if Howard wants to also include his comments, we have discussed that as far as what the city's living wages minimum requirements are and how that's going to impact. We've reached out to the city to determine some potential impact for next year, and also have discussed having an increase to at least provide them with sufficient in case we're not able to find a different method or approach.
And President Noble, members of the board, Board Member Cashman, we did increase the substitute salaries this year. We tried to affect them by the 6% that the state expected all school employees to receive. It would be nice to be able to increase that more next year. We do have a scale of different pay levels for different substitute positions based on hard to fill positions, whether the substitute is a licensed teacher, whether they have a college degree and things like that. But it would be nice to be able to offer them more. It would increase our fill rates.
So just one other thing that the board may want to consider, and I know we brought it up at the legislature breakfast, but somehow if they could give us a temporary waiver for like the next 5 years, it's going to kill us educationally. For our teachers that are retiring, you know, they're not going to, I can't see them coming back and taking all of these hits. And for our subs, if, you know, I mean, somehow the legislature has to either come up with more money or say, you know, to some category of employees, we're going to waive this for the next 5 years. I'm just throwing that out, but it's really something that's really important to advocate, or we're going to have even harder time filling our vacancies.
For what it's worth, I think that's one of the most important things they could do just with our vacancy issue. It's so big. Okay, moving on to the next section, post page 15.
Thank you, Madam President. We are moving on to discuss for a few minutes the K5 Plus program. And some of the first couple pages will probably be a little bit of a review, but we have a means to our madness as we're going to look at something new as we go to the end of this presentation. So,
and just to jump in, should we hold our questions to the end of the presentation?
If you don't mind.
Okay.
Thank you. So I think most of you are aware that the whole reason we're doing K5 Plus and have been, as across the country, we find that we improve student outcomes by adding instructional days for all probably the obvious reasons. So we have in the legislature who has agreed and has been helping us with the 25 days. We did it again this past year, the 25 extra days for the 19-20 school year. Obviously, teachers were compensated for that, support staff at the daily rate. One of the things that we have to do is maintain, one of the requirements is that we have to maintain the same teacher with the same students that were in their program in the summer. And as you know, that's very difficult to do, and that's where sometimes we lose funds because we aren't able to do that. And that'll come in a little bit down the road here, and we'll discuss that in just a minute. The other requirement on this page is the iStation assessment requirements, which I'm sure you remember, and free and reduced lunch membership above 80%. So that also will come into effect in a few minutes, so I'm going to go on. So we're going to talk about what really happened this summer then in our membership. What happened toward the end of spring, if you remember, we were in a little bit of chaos because they changed program from K3 plus to K5 plus. They added 4th and 5th grades. They also mandated, instead of best practice, they mandated that now the student must follow the teacher. And since they did all of this so close to implementation, we didn't have enough time to really communicate with our community, really help. You know, I think with K3 plus, we've been doing it for so many years. A lot of this communication is easy for us because it's obvious to the parents that the K3 plus program works. They've read about it for years. They understand it. They want their kids in that program, and so we haven't had as much trouble with that. But when you add 2 new grades, and the kids have been used to going to other city programs or whatnot, we're competing, or they're not understanding what it's all about, or do they even want to go there. And the kids are older, and I don't know that they really have the wherewithal to care that they can do better if they go to summer school in this kind of fashion. So you add that all up together, you look down at the membership. We projected, again, we were working with teachers, with schools, trying to get them to, if you will, really pushing teachers to take this work on in the summer for 4th and 5th grade. It was very difficult to get teachers to do this because there were 2 big reasons, and so this is going to affect what we talk about in a little while. And if a teacher is smart enough to know that if they work for 25 days, then all of a sudden they have to start teaching in the fall. It's not even fall, really. It's the middle of, it's summer still. August 8th, to be exact. And they don't have much of a break in there, that they're going to be extremely tired as they move along. They don't look forward to that. Now, they also don't like that they don't get to use a lot of their leave. We did agree in negotiations to give them, I think, at least 2 days sick leave, and we haven't in all these years. They just didn't get paid if they didn't show for K5 plus, because it's budgeted in a whole different way, right? It's this finite amount, so they didn't come, they didn't get paid. That, we helped them a little bit. But nonetheless, what happened is we projected it at 2368. The actual enrolled finally was only 1168. And the funding, as you can see, we were projected with that membership, we were projected at over 3 million, 3.2 million. The actual then funding that we used and needed was 1.8 million based on the 1168. And we're going to have to revert back that 1.4 million.
I'm sure we did it last week.
So I'm going to move on, and I'll be coming back to those kind of ideas in a few minutes. The next slide just tells you who, I think, for interest sake, you'll see that which schools participated and their total membership and their actual K5 membership. So I'm going to back up again and say that our K3 membership has always been pretty stable. It's always shown to be very good for kids, and that's throughout the state and in many districts across the nation. The K5, I don't want to equate that to what we want to do specifically, because there were so many problems in doing it at the last minute and having so many difficult restrictions upon it. So if we go on to the next page, there was one more program that we started this year, or actually PED started, and we jumped on the bandwagon because we thought it was good for kids as well, is our extended learning program, which is a model that included all the K-5 sites to enrich the curriculum and close the skill gaps for students. But we actually ended up having extended learning sites at our high schools and secondary too. So that really probably should have been K-12. Am I right, Ms. Rayo? So different schools did different things. Some schools added 10 days at the beginning of the 1920 school year. And if they did add school days, we had to compensate those teachers. We also had to provide, and are still providing, by the way, through this year, 80 hours of PD for these teachers. Along the way, we're also providing PD for all teachers, so that kind of combines, if you will. And we also have after-school programming, an enrichment program, and again, extended learning, if you will, after school. That's more of a definition. So there were seven Santa Fe schools that participated in both. So we ended up getting, and Ms. Rael, you might say if I'm right or wrong on this, I'm pretty sure that because we participated in K-5 and the extended learning, we ended up with more funds because of that. We doubled, basically a double of the funds, Ms. Rael?
Yes. President Noble and members of the board and Deputy Superintendent Sink, that is correct. We were able to count students who were in, or for schools that had both programs, we were able to use those numbers to increase the program budget.
When you look at the schools that participated and wondering, again, why didn't all participate, there was another restriction that I think we forgot to put in here that was really a hard restriction for us, and that is that every grade had to participate. So if we couldn't get in some schools every grade participating, that school couldn't participate. So that was another restriction. So these restrictions is what I want you to keep in mind when we propose to you a new idea. So going to the 1920 extended learning program costs, looking at 10 instructional days, the professional development, the membership at this point was projected at almost 5,000 at a funding of 1.9 million. We are still offering extended learning programs after school, so we don't have an end product for you, a number for you yet. We will even have 10 more days for some schools of their extended day. They decided not to do it last June or July, so now they're going to probably do it, well, they'll do it this June if they're doing that fashion. Some agreed to do the extended day, some agreed to do it after school program. So we'll have data for you as we move along through the year and at the end of this year. So the extended learning schools, this was very typical in the high schools. For their extended days, you'll probably recognize some of so we got funds for this, so now for the first time, it didn't come out of operational. The jump starts got counted out of that extended learning funds, which was really great for us because it didn't have to come out of our pocket for this coming year. So Capital, Early College, Santa Fe, and Mandela all did certain things like jump starts. CHS actually did AVID programming with all of their schools, did a lot of work with kids, and ECO had a program in math. Some of the elementary schools' activities did enrichment programs with STEAM, working on ELA and math, obvious things that they want to have kids have more practice to reach those skill gaps and help kids, get to where they need to get to. So now what I want to propose to you, I don't know if this is redundant I don't know that you've heard about this at this point. I would suspect you have. But I just officially want to bring to your attention of what we're looking at. There's a lot to do to get ready to see that this is going to be viable and where we'll finally end up. But we all certainly want your input and want to bring it to your attention. If we know that these instructional days are viable and important for student achievement and to improve our outcomes, which we have a lot of room for improvement, we want to go broader and hit more kids and hit more teachers, hit more schools. We feel that if we can do that, we could maybe hit this outcome at a higher, faster rate, because we'll see kids. We won't have those restrictions anymore, because if we started school and added 25 instructional days now, not to K-5 plus, that would be the restricted K-5 plus that we've been doing previously, but reach out to PED and apply, and they're asking us to apply with some innovative ideas, that if we now build a program that's all students, all K-8 students, kinder through 8th grade, which then becomes all elementary schools, all the way through K-8, community schools and middle schools. And we start school earlier, such as in July, and I was just talking with our chief financial officer today that if we started in July, if this really, really happened, that in June, where we usually spend $1 million on summer school, we'd have to give off kids in June, so we would save that $1 million, because they'd be starting in July. We wouldn't want them, and this is hypothetical. Everything I'm saying to you today, right now, is hypothetical. So we start school, for instance, let's say we start school on July 10th. We get through the 4th of July. We realize everyone wants their vacation 4th of July. And instead of doing, as I said, summer school, or instead of doing other things and having a smaller K-5 program, that we do this all-encompassing, if you will. It's very close to the idea of year-round school, right? And we, instead of doing the 25 days, which is a lot of days in that summer, that what we have proposed and have been writing up this whole package for Dr. Garcia and with Dr. Garcia, that we would put 20 days in that calendar in the beginning, starting in July up through that beginning of August, and then keep moving through. We would have to reposition where our end of quarters are, for instance. But we could now put in some vacation days scattered through, and the way we would do that is add minutes to the day, and we've already done that. Ms. Rayal and I have been working on that. She's put a number of hours into it. I've tried to help. But you add minutes to the day so that you don't have to add 25 days. You would only add 20 days because you've built in the minutes of those 5 days. Just like we build in minutes for snow days. Same idea. You build in minutes for the other 5 days. We would still be given the funds for the 25 days, just like we do for K-5 plus. We just don't make the kids come for 25 extra days. We make them come for 20 days. They're just in school a little longer. In this way, it's obvious that that teacher that starts with them on July 15th is with them the whole year. This way, we have teachers that aren't upset with us because they're not going to start in July 15th or 12th and have to keep teaching in August forever till they finally have a vacation on Labor Day for 1 day. What we've built in is some time off, if you will, throughout the year, so that it really starts to mirror. It's not exactly the same, but it starts to mirror year-round. Right now what we're doing is we're looking at different calendars. We have met with Union, and if you go to the next page on here, I think I've hit everything there. If you look at what we're doing on our planning for implementation is, one, we're beginning with you all, talking with you all, planting the seed, getting your ideas. We're going to be sending out surveys to make sure that our workforce has sufficient support, and we need to hear from them on what that sufficient support would be. And also, are they willing to think about doing this? Then we're going to be looking at all of the policy and statutory changes required. And we're obviously going to be canvassing the community. So there is so much to do. So this is certainly just the very beginning. And I think Ms. Rael and I think Cabinet altogether are looking at this as, a vision, just be the greatest thing that we could imagine happening, but we are realists and understand that there's still a lot of roadblocks, a lot of people to listen to. Is it possible? But I will tell you, because of the research behind us, that PED is very interested in what we're talking about. So I guess this is the last page. I don't know if I'm ready yet. No, I'm kidding.
It's now or never.
We're ready.
Secretary Garcia and then Board Member Carrillo.
Just really quick, great, awesome news. I actually know from hearing through the state elected officials that Board President Ms. Noble has actually been working very hard in this subject, as well as Dr. Garcia and the Cabinet. And thank you all for working on that. And as you mentioned earlier, once again, thank you all for working on this, because whenever you have the lawsuit Yazzie Martinez that requires the state of New Mexico to actually move forward and provide the different outcomes that the ex-late judge actually mentioned in her brief, and so now, as a state as a whole, how do we do this? That's a good question, right? Because everybody says, here's all the money in the world, now go do it. Oh, really? Well, how? So I think, once again, as I mentioned President Noble, Superintendent, yourself, Cabinet, staff, all you all individuals, as to let's be like a role model for the state of New Mexico, and let's try it. And and as you said, let's have a vision to see, and let's be not necessarily an experimental school district, but like I said, Dr. Garcia, President Noble, and as well as us, let's try it. Let's think outside the box, because sometimes people don't like to think outside the box. They just like, no, we've never done that before, but let's try it. Let's do it. And I appreciate your hard work that you have done, and that I hear out there from the community and the state elected officials as to, look, Santa Fe Public Schools they're willing to try this, and maybe we could utilize them as this engine to see how we can do it throughout the entire state. So I think this is excellent news, great news. Thank you for what you all.
Madam President, Board Member Garcia, thank you for your comments. I want to make sure that, kind of to emphasize what you said, Mr. Garcia, that our superintendent is the one that brought this to us. And at first, all of us were worried, can we really do this? And she's been quite the cheerleader on this, and I think all of us are really starting to see that it could happen. So I just wanted to really give credit to our superintendent on this.
Board Member Carrillo.
Yeah, I'm glad for the. Thanks for putting this together as well. I like the idea of thinking of things that are different. A lot of community input on this one, and in some cases, I'm not a huge fan of like putting the finger up every time we want to make a big decision. But here, obviously, there are a lot of summer programs, not only in Santa Fe that we run, I can't remember right this minute, the one that Susan started.
Hands-on Heritage.
There's Hands-on Heritage, and many like that, right? There are many summer camps. There are many businesses. We are and I'm not being a naysayer at all. This is why we really need to go out, not just to the parent community, but the business community. Because we are a tourist industry, we rely on young people for a lot of these jobs. It's bad enough that they go back before Indian Market Weekend and Labor Day. And because then all of a sudden you're losing a lot of your temporary staff the minute your business is starting to peak. And, there are challenges here. I had something around the 80 hours of PD, not per person, That's just 80 hours that we're committing as a district toward professional development?
Yes.
Okay. And then, boy, and if we did this, I mean, obviously, if we did this as a whole district, I've got to wonder, is there the opportunity for a family or kids to opt out? Because one of the things that we even find right now, because of when we start school, which is earlier than many states in the United States, because so many states are going to day after Labor Day, we already create a lot of hardships for families, because it's hard enough trying to coordinate with their private school brethren, but just all of the others around the country. So, no, this is a massive undertaking, and it's exciting to even think about. I mean, I'd be interested in also at some point seeing some numbers put to this, because if we're also looking at in this next fiscal year the possibility of a $3.5 million hit, that's a lot of money, you know, and then to embark on something, is the SEG going to increase because all of, you know, just what are the mechanics of working this out with the legislature? And maybe something like this doesn't roll out until fall 2021, or maybe even 2022, but just the idea of that, that we're working on something like this, I think is, it's exciting. Thanks for bringing that.
Board Member Cashman.
Before I talk about the exciting thing, I want to go back to the slides and just ask a few questions. On slide number 17, when we were talking about K-5 plus programming, and we had a hard time recruiting and getting those kids because kids don't want to come to summer school. That's probably, instead of saying summer school, we should market it differently, like summer adventure camp or something. Summer school, I mean, even for many parents think, my kid has been failing and now you're trying to catch him up. Nobody wants to admit or think that their child is failing. So the minute you use the word summer school, it's been here from history, so we should try at least a different marketing name to that. Yeah.
On that point, it's no longer summer school if school's year-round. It's just school.
Yeah, but I'm not getting
No,
to
I hear what
the,
you're saying.
I'm not,
Yeah.
no, I'm not getting to the new, I'm still talking
Oh,
about the
okay.
programs.
Got it. Okay.
So because we may not be able to get there for this summer. So I'm just saying for K-5 plus, we should probably be marketing it differently to our parents. On slide number 18, where we listed the schools that were participating in K-5, why we may have seen not as many students participate is most of those schools, not all of them, but are K-6. And so parents still have that sixth grader to do something with. And so that may be why we might need to increase it to K-6 for our schools in like Cesar Chavez, K-5, but to be consistent that the whole school is participating. And then on page number 19, the 80 hours of PD, is this accounted for separately, or are we double counting it? That if we've given 80 hours to our staff anyways, we're saying, oh, well, that 80 hours being, because I have a problem with that, because first of all, not everybody is participating in it, you know, and, you know, 80 hours may sound like a lot, but it really isn't for, so are we double counting this and saying, well, because you were in extended learning, now us as a district are rolling back those hours?
Well, Board Member Cashman, as far as I understand it, and I may need some help on it, but as far as I understand it, I'll just give you my example, is that we had professional development on August 8th for all staff. We're going to have another in-service for all staff on November 5th. There's 16 hours right there. We have professional development for elementary teachers every Friday afternoon. That's an hour every week. They're allowing us, so we're going by their stipulation, really, by PED's rules. that we can go about counting that way in order to garner those funds for PD.
Ms. Rael, did you want to add something there?
Yeah.
If I may, Board President Noble and Board Member Cashman, I just wanted to also add around the professional development that we know most of the applications to the state for the extended learning segment of programming was revolving around improving outcomes around reading and math. So our professional development that we're hosting is typically around data, math, and reading, and so it's a nice way to marry those two. As of this afternoon, I actually had already estimated that elementary schools that were part of the extended learning had already met around 40 hours because of the segment of days that happen early in the school year. And for middle and high schools, we're at about 38 hours, I believe. So we get to report those every reporting period between now and the end of the school year.
Okay, so then if we're using those days as, you know, on Fridays for our elementary, an hour for all teacher staff days, then our need for substitutes should be going down, because a lot of times professional training required us to pull teachers out of the classroom for a concentrated, you know, 3 to 4 hours. So are we seeing some savings there then? Are we tracking it?
Yeah, and I'll defer to Deputy Superintendent Sink a little bit here, but yes, I think that any time we deliver professional development that's unique to the school, and there's time already built in on those Fridays to do so, we are seeing some savings around substitutes, absolutely. I don't know, Deputy Sink, if you have anything else to add.
The only thing else that I'd add is where we're, I think, getting, if you will, a good bang for our buck is through professional learning communities. So my staff in teaching and learning, we have a staff like, let's say, math, and we're going into a professional learning community, and we're working with those teachers on a curriculum map, developing lesson plans. It's just how Ms. Rael is saying, it's on-time learning, it's direct face-to-face with exactly what they want to know. And so what we've gone from all the skill building, if you will, for the last 3 years, we promised Dr. Garcia this year, we're really trying to push in to individual teachers and individual schools now, and not having the bigger groups of 100 people at a time. That's not to say that I haven't gotten some pushback on still needing subs. Subs are hard to get, and the principals, you know, have been hurting for subs and even having to cover for some classes because, so I'll just give you an example where I can't do that is because of instructional materials. There's so many new science materials that they have to learn how to use them, and so we have pulled science teachers out to learn how to use those instructional materials. So is it still happening? Yes, but not as much as it did for the first 3 years.
And just a reminder, as our staff changes, we can't assume that all those basic skills that we've already taught, I mean, those need to be caught up to, and teachers benefit from rehearing some of those things multiple times. So what they didn't catch in the first time, they may catch in the second time. On page 20, for K-5 plus and extended learning schools, are we needing to account separately for those funds from our operational budget?
Board Member Cashman, so for the K-5 plus and the extended learning, if they were counted both in those programs, we did not distinguish those as separate unless they had an extended learning program at their site. So for these 7 sites that are listed on page or slide 20, we did have those separated as far as what was allocated for each of those programs. Yes.
Because I just think it's important to have the accounting separate. So if for some reason we don't meet what the state is requiring and they come and claw back the money, we do not want to get ourselves into a budget that we've overspent because we thought we had this money and now we have to give the state back money, okay? And now I'm getting to where the big stuff is, the K-5, K-8 plus program. I know I've talked with Dr. Garcia about this too. Just some things for us to remember, and I know you're just starting on it, so it's not all fleshed out. It's really critical that we work with our union on this, because if we don't get the teachers behind it, the program's not going to be successful. Another thing that if we go to this, which I'm going to call year-round school, what is that going to do to recruiting of our staff? Because our teachers are going to need to be hired a lot sooner than later, because we have a lot of teachers that will retire in a normal course of like the end of May or June. So that's going to push up our recruiting time frame. So it's really important to be aware of that. We need to make sure that all of our schools have functioning air conditioning, because obviously that's going to be a problem. How will we normally our facility staff works really hard over the summer getting those schools ready for the new school year, so we have a lot of periodic maintenance that goes on during the summer. If we're using the schools year-round, how are we going to get all the maintenance done? So something just to think about, because that will become a problem. And then if we are only going to bring back 20 days, and then add the minutes onto the day, and we're only doing it for K-8, okay, if that's what our goal is. We need to be a little bit careful and talk with athletics, because many of our 8th graders join high school athletics. And so now if their day is longer, we may be denying them an opportunity, or it may just become complicated. So we need to make sure we're taking that into consideration. So our 8th graders, if they have a desire, can start participating at high school level sports. And so, looks good, thank you.
I have a question, which is, having done a quick calculation of our participation this year, El Camino Real is way beyond anybody else. They're at 66%, if these numbers are right. The total MEM's not right on El Camino. That's what it is. Okay, never mind. Any other questions? Well, I want to say thank you for this. It's really exciting, and I have had the privilege of being a part of some of this thinking and these conversations, and I would say it does require a creative approach. It requires thinking differently, and even in talking with our NEA union president, who has been thinking a lot about the calendar, and I think as Deputy Superintendent Sink outlined, there's a survey in the works in partnership, and it's been really great to see sort of some of the thinking, but I think it's a whole new rhythm for the school year, and hopefully it's a little bit less of a sprint, and there can be a little bit more space for lack of a better way of putting it, play and fun, and just what we all sort of imagine school can be if you can slow it down and not be constantly worried about high-stakes testing, but you can actually be doing the human thing that is learning from each other. And I think even your small learning communities are a good example of that, but we're sort of going back in that direction of bringing humanity back to the education system. And there's a long way to go on an idea like this, but it's really exciting even just to sort of play with it in your mind as to what a different rhythm could be like with sort of more frequent breaks. And that was something that I know Ms. Mayer was pretty keen on, was that there be a week off in the fall, not just a couple days, that there be more decent chunks for recharging for educators. So anyway, thank you. That's exciting. Board Member Cashman.
And so if we're going to have a week off or something like that, we've got to be really cognizant of working with all of the partners, the city, the Boys and Girls Club, because because parents are going to need childcare. And so now, when they can have bigger blocks of time, but now if it's more scattered, then we've got to make sure those organizations, because the last thing we want to do is leave kids home alone.
And in a fortuitous moment, I actually got a call from a city councilor when this was very much on my mind, and the conversation was, because it would really change, you know, would the city meet this with programs? And, you know, not surprisingly, the answer was absolutely, because it would really change what the city would do with its summer programs. And so maybe, you know, there was talk about, okay, well, yeah, we could do a weekly program, and we could, you know, because it would change a lot in terms of the rhythms of care and education, to use a phrase, in this community. Yeah.
I would say, even though the city says we're going to jump up, where they're going to have problems with getting employees. I mean, and one of the big things is the pools. You know, they don't have enough
They have that
lifeguarding.
problem already.
They don't have enough lifeguarding now, but that becomes an essential thing during the summer. And so, you know, now if you can't, you know, it's a big thing that everybody's going to be thinking about.
Okay, moving on to advanced planning. Anything, updates, changes? No, we good?
I just have a couple of things. For my district, that I do drive my district every single day, just to let everybody out there know that. Really quick, if somebody could check with the superintendent, actually, at Cesar Chavez, the doors open at, I believe, at 8:10 or 8:15, and I stopped her the other morning when it was freezing cold out there, and the buses dropped them off like anywhere from 7:50 to 8 o'clock, so I walked in there, and we had the counselor said, "Oh, we don't open the doors till, I believe, 8:15, or whoever was in there." I'm like, "Okay, well, these kids are outside freezing," so I just wanted the superintendent to look at it, see if we need to open the doors at least. If the buses are dropping off at 8:50 or 7:50, 8 o'clock, and they don't open the doors till 8:15, just can you please look into that, please? Also appreciate the honesty from Mr. Chavez here. Actually, we talked about the Capitol High. Once again, I have to put this out there. My district that I drive through every single day, and I look at it every single day, is the upgrades of Capitol High School, the baseball field. You guys are actually starting not remodel, but actually taking out the grass and putting the turf fields in, as we talked about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I appreciate that. Thank you, because it is moving. Thank you. And I think that's it for now. And at the next advanced planning, the only thing on that note I have is in regards to, I may possibly ask the board once again to move our study sessions, and if we cannot do that, then I will continue to deal with the situation I'm in. But thank you.
Okay. Anything else on advanced planning? Thank you very much. We're adjourned.